Good afternoon to everyone. I am Jean Ilio, Gender Specialist of UPPAF Respond. Welcome to the seventh webinar of the WGDP webinar series on women's economic empowerment. A special welcome to our Suki or repeat webinar attendees, members of the WSAP or Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines, and the National GAD Resource Pool, and to our speakers and panelists. Now we have Jazz to give us the house rules. Jazz?
Right. Participants other than the speakers and panelists are muted. You may ask questions to the panel via Q&A tab or the chat box. There will be an open forum where your questions will be answered. Lastly, help us improve. Kindly indicate in the survey if you would like to receive a copy of the presentations. Back to you, Ms. Jean.
Yeah. May we go to the third slide, please? For participants who are attending the WGDP webinar for the first time, okay, those are the house rules. Uh, The webinar series is a joint activity of the Regulatory Reform Support Program for National Development or RESPOND of the UP Public Administration Research and Extension Services Foundation or UPAF, a grantee of the United States Agency for International Development, and its main partner, the Philippine Commission on Women. The intent at the beginning of the series is to try to address the key concerns of women entrepreneurs and workers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a USAID grantee, UPAF Respond has designed a program of activities to promote USAID's gender equality and female empowerment policy. The UPAF Respond WGDP program aims to create an enabling environment by removing restrictive regulatory barriers through gender-informed and gender-responsive competitiveness-enhancing regulatory reform initiatives. At the same time, UPAF is promoting the twin goals of gender equality and women's empowerment of the Philippine government. This is an advocacy issue that UPAF Respond shares with the PCW and its other partners for the present webinar. So far, we have had 6 webinars, 4 in 2020 and 2 in 2021, last January and last March. Last March, we have Nazi as Dr. Africa Verceles as one of the main speakers. Now, the first 6 webinars tackled women's access to credit, logistics or moving goods, online business or e-commerce, processes and requirements of the Food and Drug Authority Administration for processed foods, alternative work arrangements, and last March, regulatory reforms related to starting a business, accessing or getting credit, and registering land, as well as experiences of entrepreneurs in navigating the old and new regulatory environment. Today's webinar will focus on tools that hopefully will contribute to creating and sustaining gender responsive governance for women's economic empowerment. As shown in the slide, the approach is informative and is focused on three new tools that GAD advocates or gender and development advocates could use to help them support gender responsive governance and promote women's empowerment in different settings or contexts. Like the March 2021 webinar, the present webinar was organized in partnership with the PCW, the UP Center for Women and Gender Studies, and the Women and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines, or WSAP, and of course, USAID. This webinar, by the way, is also a pre-WSAP conference activity. Our conference will take place uh, next next week. Now, some reminder from the webinar team. To participants who wish to receive a certificate of attendance, you should have registered in the Zoom event. You are viewing this through Zoom. Your actual viewing time, as measured by Zoom, should be at least 1 hour, and you have submitted the online post-event evaluation form. This webinar will begin with welcome remarks from the Respond Chief of Party, Dr. Henry Basilio. Would you please show the program? There will be three main presentations. Uh, First by Narlene Santos Millar of PCW, to be followed by me, and lastly by Dr. Lara Bianchi. This will be followed by commentaries on the GAD tools that were presented and an open forum. Unlike previous webinars, I will not be moderating this session. We have invited Dr. Natsi Africa Verceles, UP-CWGS Director and WSAP Treasurer, to be our moderator today. I now turn over the virtual floor to Natsi. Natsi?
Maraming salamat po, Ma'am Jean. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Again, I am Natsi Africa Verceles from the University of the Philippines Center for Women's and Gender Studies. To deliver the welcome remarks, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Enrico L. Basilio, UPPAF Respond Chief of Party. Dr. Basilio.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Verceles. Pleased to have you again in our webinar. This is, as you know, this is our 7th webinar, and the theme for this afternoon is Sustainable Gender Responsive Governance, New and Emerging Tools for GAD Advocates. And I would say this is a full house. No? So we have more than almost 350 Zoom participants, and of course this is being live streamed in our Facebook page. No? So there are more participants actually with us today, and I see a lot of familiar names. No? And for our Suki, welcome again, and I'm happy that you are once again joining us in this webinar. And for those who are joining us for the first time, also welcome. This afternoon, we have, as explained by Jean, we have 3 main speakers and also 3 discussants. No? And I would say this is an international conference, no? Because we have an international speaker from the University of Nottingham, Assistant Professor Lara Bianchi. And of course, she's being joined by no less than our gender advisor, Ms. Jean Ilo, Ms. Aurora de Dios, the co-convener of the Women's Peace Group, with Maria Leesa of the Pambansang Koalisyon ng mga Kababaihan sa Kanayunan. And of course, we have Narlene Santos Millar of the Philippine Commission for Women. Last but not the least, the only thorn among the roses, is Hamilcar Chanbueco Jr. from the Office of the Vice President, who's in charge of the GAD TWG. And let me also thank our ladies at the Respond team, who's helping out and ensuring that we'll have a very good and orderly webinar this afternoon. Miriel Damsani, Jobel Alzate, Kay Bagas, and Ms. Jas Montenegro. Okay, so just a little background about the UPPAF Respond project. Respond stands for Regulatory Support Reform Support Program for National Development, or Respond for short. And this is being implemented by UPPAF, which means UP Public Administration Research and Extension Services Foundation, which is a partner foundation of the UP National College of Public Administration and Governance. As mentioned by Jean earlier, this Respond project is being supported through a grant by the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. It's a 5-year project. We are on our 2nd year, and we will be here until 2024. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is how we present the project. The overarching goal of the project is to improve the environment for trade and investment by making it more open and competitive. And to do this, we implement programs and projects that enhances market competition. How? By removing barriers to market entry, and also reducing the regulatory burden by streamlining regulatory processes to reduce transaction costs, shorten the number of days by which the business community and the public transact with the government. Okay, and the work on ease of doing business is basically under this first objective. And this afternoon, our Women Economic Empowerment, Women Global Development program falls under this main objective. Now, the other part of the project, objective number 2, has to do with strengthening regulatory governance and capacity. So how? By strengthening regulatory oversight and also strengthening transparency and accountability mechanisms. So major work that we are doing here is trying to decouple the conflicting mandates of many of our regulatory agencies, because as you know, many of our regulatory agencies are imbued or vested with both regulatory and commercial functions, which are by nature are in conflict with each other. And the last cross-cutting objective is promoting citizen engagement, especially in policy and regulatory reform. Okay, next slide.
I think that's all.
Okay, so that's all. So, but thank you very much, and I hope I was able to give you a snapshot of what the Respond project is all about. As mentioned by Jean, it's a part of our work in women economic empowerment is to ensure that regulations do not discriminate against women in especially in business and economic activities. So Jean and Dr. Nathalie, thank you very much for giving me this time. And again, once again, welcome to the participants and to our speakers. Thank you. And we hope that we will, I'm sure we will have a very productive webinar and discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much po, Dr. Enrico L. Basilio. Now we will proceed to the presentations. May I please remind all the presenters that you have 25 minutes each. I will gently interrupt at the 23-minute mark so you can wrap up your discussion. We will begin with the PCW GFPS functionality assessment tool, and we are honored to have with us Narlene L. Santos Millar, who is Chief PCW Technical Services and Regional Coordination Division. Narlene is the head of the PCW division in charge of providing technical assistance on GAD to national government agencies and local government units through the National Gender Resource Program, or the NGRP, and Local Gender Resource Program, or the LGRP. She has led and facilitated the development and updating of various gender and development policies, tools, and guidelines, including the implementing rules and regulations of several gender laws, the revision of the gender mainstreaming evaluation framework in 2016, and the development and packaging of the GAD agenda training module for trainers launched in 2020. Friends, my pleasure to welcome Ma'am Narlene Santos Millar.
Thank you,
Please
Dr. Natsi. Good
You're
afternoon.
welcome.
Hello, Miss Jean. Good afternoon to our former Chair Oyi, my co-presenters, and also our reactors, fellow GR pool members, Daryl and Ham. Also, Dr. Enrico Basilio, good afternoon po sa inyo. This afternoon, I am with my colleagues from PCW, Kimberly Antiodoro and Lauren Tuanyo. They're also joining us this afternoon. And I would like to welcome the members of the National Gender Resource Pool for joining us in this learning session. This is one of the learning sessions that PCW is offering also to our Certified Gender Resource Pool members. So let me start by sharing my screen. I have 25 minutes. I'm also timing myself, Dr. Natsi. So if I really went over, I have to stop. That's the rule. All right. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Right, thank you. So this afternoon, since the webinar is designed to talk about tools related to gender and development or to achieving women's empowerment and gender equality, the PCW is pleased to share a draft. No, this is actually the results of the pre-testing has not been shared with our management committee, but it will be shared next week. This is the first time that we're presenting the results of the pre-testing of the GAD focal point system functionality assessment tool. My presentation will cover three major content. Now, the outline includes a review of the policy basis and composition of GAD focal point system. This is sort of a review for everybody and to level up also for those who are not aware about what the GAD focal point system is about. Then I will briefly talk about the contents of the GAD focal point system functionality assessment tool and share the results of the pre-testing that we have done for the tool this semester. Okay, but first, for those who are in the chat, in the Zoom webinar, may I please ask the tech team to launch the poll? This is just to get an information about the participants as to how many of these policies on the GAD focal point system are you familiar with? Can you please click as many or check as many that you know? Okay, so can we give you 30 seconds? Yan. All right, so please, we will end this in a little bit more seconds because we have only 25 minutes. Okay, so we have about 50. You can click or check as many policy that you know. All right, so let's end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, can we share the results, please? All right, so based on the participation of around how many percent of the participants, a lot of you knows about the Magna Carta of Women. So most of you said that the basis for the creation of the GAD focal point system came from your knowledge about the Magna Carta of Women. A few of you said you know about the PCW Circular 2011-1 or the guidelines on the creation and strengthening of the GAD focal point system. Some said RA 7192 or the Women in Development and Nation Building Act. A few of you also said about the local government units guidelines on the GAD focal point system, and of course the CHED Memorandum Order 2015-01. So thank you very much for your participation in this poll question. All right, so just to trace back a little bit the roots of the GAD focal point system, as early as the 1989, the Philippines has already introduced a focal point for women's concern. This is in line with the issuance of Executive Order 348, which approves and adopted the Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development. No, the Philippine Plan for Women, 1989 to 1992. The executive order states that appropriated GAD focal point for women's concerns. The framework then is about WID, women's concern, or any other similar mechanism shall be constituted in each department of the government to ensure the implementation and review and updating of programs and projects identified by each sector. And then, of course, in 1992, with the passage of RA 7192, Section 9 of the IRR of RA 7192, or the Women in Development and Nation Building Act, states that women in development focal points shall serve as catalyst for gender responsive planning programming of their respective agencies. And in 1995, Executive Order 273 adopted the Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development. This is a 30-year framework plan. It says that WID/gender and development focal points shall assist the respective agencies ahead in fully integrating gender concerns into the whole development processes and mainstreaming of GAD in various government agencies. And of course, all of you are mentioned about, most of you mentioned about RA 7192, or the Magna Carta of Women, where a GAD focal point system has been institutionalized. So as you can see, we started from a focal point on women's concern to a sectoral with focal point, to GAD focal point, to a gender focal point system. Okay. All right, so based on the Magna Carta of Women, the GAD focal point system is now a mandatory mechanism. It means that because it's part of a national law, it is required. It is mandated that all government instrumentalities should have a GAD focal point system. This is to ensure that gender is catalyzed and accelerated, or the mainstreaming of gender concern is accelerated within the agency or the LGU. So the LGU, or the agency, shall ensure that all members of the GAD focal point system should be capacitated. So they should go through training, including gender sensitivity sessions, gender-based analysis, GAD planning and budgeting, and gender audit. And of course, with the passage of the Magna Carta of Women, we also issued several guidelines to help or operationalize how to establish the GAD focal point system. So we have the PCW Memo Circular 2011-1. This is for government agencies, state universities, and GOCCs. PCW, DILG, DBM, NEDA Joint Circular, Memo Circular 2013-1, which is for the local government units, and the CHED Memorandum Order 2015-1, which is the policy establishing the mainstreaming of gender in the Commission on Higher Education and higher education institutions in the Philippines. So the guidelines for the focal point system in the Philippines is really out there for us to know and for us to follow. So therefore, right now we define the GAD focal point system as an interacting and interdependent group of people in all government instrumentalities tasked to catalyze and accelerate gender mainstreaming. It is a mechanism established to ensure and advocate for, guide, coordinate, and monitor the development, implementation, monitoring, review, and updating of the GAD plans and GAD-related programs, activities, and projects of the agency. So from a WID point, a GAD point, to a focal point system, right? So can we now launch the second poll question, please? For those who are in the government sector or in the LGU, are you a member of the focal point system in your agency? If not, then you should choose not a member of the GAD focal point. So there are different, the structure is composed of an executive committee, a technical working group, a secretariat, a chairperson, of course. So may we know, among the participants here, are you a member of your institution's GAD focal point system, especially those that are in the government? All right, can we close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. The results? Okay. So about 60% of the participants in this Zoom webinar joined the poll, and 47% is not a member of the GAD focal point system. About 27% is a member of the GFPS Technical Working Group. We have 4% member of the GFPS Executive Committee, 16% are assigned as part of the GFPS Secretariat, and we have, wow, 7% GFPS Chair or co-chairperson. So maybe we have a high-level representation or participant in this webinar, which is a good thing. All right, thank you very much for participating in the second poll question. Now, let's go very briefly to the structure, just again, part of the review, no? So for the national government agencies, the GFPS or the GAD focal point system structure is composed of the following. Based on the guidelines issued by PCW and also by the Magna Carta of Women, the head of the GAD focal point system should be the head of the agency, or the chair of the GAD focal point system should be the head of the government agency, or designated by the head of the agency, pero not the rank is not lower than undersecretary. Now this is for the department level. Then the GAD focal point system would also have an executive committee, which is composed of the management members of the organization. And of course, they should have a technical working group composed of members from designated bureaus, units, divisions of the organization, and a secretariat, which can be in charge of assisting the technical working group in terms of the activities done by the, to be organized with the GAD focal point system. And of course, a corresponding GAD focal point system should be present in the regional offices of our department or the heads of, or the agencies in government. For higher education institutions, the GAD focal point system is also composed of the head and the executive committee, the technical working group or secretariat, and members from their campuses or external unit if they have campuses outside of the main campus. So the head of the GAD focal point for a higher education institution should be the SUC president. The members are the GFPS executive committees are members of the academic and administrative council. Members of the GAD focal point technical working group are from the different schools or colleges. Could be the dean or the GAD coordinators from the different units of the university, including the non-teaching and the teaching staff. And of course, if you have GAD coordinators from different campuses, they should be part of the technical working group. For local government units, our composition is like this. For provincial and municipal and city level, the chair should be the local chief executive or an alternate chair to be designated by the LCE. If an LGU has a GAD office, they should be able to support the function of the GAD focal point system. Then they should have a vice chair to be designated by the local chief executives. And the members of the GAD focal point executive committee should be the heads of the LGU departments and other officers relevant to gender mainstreaming, chairs of the Committee on Sanggunian, Women, Children and Family, and Appropriations, representatives from the groups like PNP Women's Desk, IP Indigenous People Group, where it is present, persons with disabilities groups, women's organization or recognized NGOs, private sector, and academe. So for the LGUs, they could actually expand their membership to include other civil society organizations relevant to gender and development or women and development concerns. So all of the leagues can also be part of the focal point system. So these are the minimum requirements. As I said, the LGU can expound on their focal point system. All right. So for the barangay, of course, the barangay is the smallest unit of government in the Philippines. So we have also GAD focal point in the barangays, which is chaired by the punong barangay and co-chaired by the councilor or the chair of the Sanggunian Barangay Committee on Women and Children and Family, and then the members are the following: barangay health workers, barangay human rights action officers, nutrition scholars, treasurer, daycare worker, etc., etc. So these are already provided in the guidelines for the localization of the Magna Carta of Women, which is JMC 2013-1. So these are just very briefly the mandates of, or the functions of each of the composition or the structure. The chair issues the policies, approves the gender mainstreaming efforts. The EXICOM sets the direction, monitor, lead. The GFPS, of course, is the one that really makes sure that the GAD plans of the agencies and LGUs are implemented. All right, so we now go to the third part, which is the second part, which is the content of the GFPS functionality tool. I have 10 minutes. So what is the purpose of the functionality assessment tool? As I said, since this is already a required mechanism under the Magna Carta of Women, it means that all government agencies should have focal point system and local government units should have a GAD focal point system, which is will facilitate the mainstreaming of gender perspective in your systems, processes, and activities. So why did we develop this? This is developed because, as you know, as I said, 1989 we started with focal point, and now we are now 2011. So how many years have we been saying that we should have a focal point system to make sure that women and gender concerns are addressed in our programs? So we need to we developed this tool to help us examine that the mechanisms that are present in the agencies or in the LGUs are really functional. And of course, to set the baseline information as to the level of functionality of the GAD focal point system of government instrumentalities. Okay, the scope of the GFPS assessment tool is the last 3 years, meaning if an agency or LGU will assess starting 2021, so they will go back from 2019 to 2018. So why did we choose 3 years? Because we think that that's a good term, that's a good term to do an assessment of the efforts in terms of the functionality of GAD focal point system. So for the local government units, we have 4 functionality assessment areas. So we look at the creation of the GAD focal point system, which is the presence of a competent local chief executive to spearhead the creation and strengthening of the focal point system. Number 2, letter B is the structure and composition of the GFPS, which outlines the list of possible roles of each groups and individuals. Letter C, fulfillment of the roles and responsibilities. For the LGUs, we base this on JMC 2013-1. And of course, what are the core competencies that the GAD focal point system members should have to make sure that they perform their functions? Right. For the LGU, we have about 71 indicators to measure their functionality. So we have 5 for the assessment area 1 or the establishment of the GFPS, 7 for the composition, 35 for their roles and functions, and 24 for their competencies. Now for the NGA, we have 3. NGA is National Government Agencies. We have 3 assessment areas: structure and composition of the GFPS, fulfillment of their roles and functions, and core competencies of the GAD focal point system members. So similar to the definition of the LGU. For the GFPS at the national level, we have 16 indicators for the structure and composition, 42 for the roles and functions, and 42 for the core competencies, a total of 100 points. Now, this is how the functionality will be assessed. For the LGUs, there will be 3 levels. You are either established, functional, or fully functional. For an established GFPS, the LGU should score at least 36 points out of 71 to be able to say that you're functional, 37 to 60 points out of 71, and fully functional, 61 to 71 points. For national government agencies, there are 4 levels of functionality: established, functional, fully functional, and highly functional. So this one is called based on percentage you got from total of 100%. So 50% and below, it's established, 51 to 75 functional, 76 to 90% fully functional, and 91 to 100% highly functional GAD focal point system. Now, these are the sample of the tool. So for the LGU, we have 4 assessment areas, and each one have corresponding indicators or descriptors. So that's really stated. So there's a descriptor column and then a scoring guide, then the score and the suggested means of verification. That's how the tool is crafted. For the NGA, similar. We have the assessment area, the scoring guide, the MOV, the score, and the remarks. Okay. Now, what's the result? So let me just present the results in 5 minutes. This is the submission process. So we started the pre-testing last March 30, 2021 for the LGUs, and the deadline was set at May 7, 2021. We set the tool, we distributed the tool to 182 local government units, and as of May 7, 81 submitted their assessment or their comments on the functionality assessment tool for a total of 45% of 182. So we have 17 provinces, 39 cities, and 25 municipalities. And per region, we noticed that all regions are almost represented in terms of submission of their assessment tool. Now, for the national government agencies, we started our pre-testing last March 1, and the deadline we set was on April 22. So the number of agencies that we sent the tool is 170. However, only 38 submitted their assessment. So this is the breakdown. So we have from the national government agency 24, ang sinelect tatlo. There are 3 who submitted: Office of the Vice President, the Department of Finance, the Department of Tourism, other executive offices 4, Dangerous Drugs Board, MTRCB, National Anti-Poverty Commission, and the Presidential Legislative Liaison Office. Constitutional commissions, we have 2, the Commission on Audit and Commission on Elections. From the judiciary, we have the Sandigan Bayan. Attached agencies, we have the Bureau of Broadcast Services, the OST, Philippine Council on Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resource and Development, DOST PSHERD, DOST PBOX, DOST SEI. We have a hospital, Jose Reyes Memorial Medical Center, the National Maritime Polytechnic School, Philippine Competition Commission, Public-Private Partnership Center of the Philippines, Securities and Exchange Commission, Tourism's Promotion Board, and from the GOCC we have 16. We have the Aurora Freeport Zone, Authority Freeport of Bataan, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Center for Intelligence and Trade Exposition and Mission, Development Academy of the Philippines, GSIS, Lang Center, MWSS, Philippine PTD Network, Philippine Children's Medical Center, Philippine Coconut Authority, PDIC, PIDS, PITC, PBDEC, and Social Security System, and 1 regional line agency, NEDA Region 12. So a total of 22% out of the total 170 target. So what's the result? We actually, based on our tool that we used for assessing, for the NGA, we asked them to assess in the following areas. Look at the introductory part of the tool, the content of the tool, the MOVs for each assessment area, and the overall presentation of the GFPS assessment tool. So for this, they would have to respond whether they strongly agree, neither agree or disagree, or strongly disagree. So for the introductory part, most of the participants said that they either strongly agree or agree with the content of the tool.
Ma'am Narlene?
Yes,
Ma'am, 2 minutes po to go.
Yes, I know. Thank you.
Po.
Thank you, Dr. Nancy. For the recommendations, so they said that there should be conduct of orientation session and provide simpler version containing visual aids to follow the instruction easily and systematically. So we'll take note of that. For the content, the descriptors, most of them says they strongly agree that it's clear, and the recommendation includes the long list of CapDev activities may be far-reaching for LGU, especially municipalities and those cities, so we will look into this. For the MOVs, most of the responses are in the agree level, and the recommendations are, some of the MOVs are, or the means of verification are hard to generate. There is a need to identify minimum required documents to be presented as MOVs. For the overall presentation of the GFPS tool for LGU, most of those who responded said that they strongly agree that the overall presentation is very clear in terms of the tool. Now, for the recommendation for the LGU, the team who will administer the tool should be oriented first. The tool is comprehensive and will help the GFPS identify weak and strong points. And there is a need to consider the difference of barangay, municipalities, cities, and provinces. But for the record, this tool is not really designed for barangays yet. That's what we decided. Now, for the NGAs, the overall impression, it is easy to accomplish and it can help us track. We agree. The tool is comprehensive but lengthy. Considering encouraging the GFPS to administer the tool in a semestral basis. So this is the frequency of administration. For the feedback on the content, so they said that they strongly agree and agree that's very clear. Some recommendation, consider assigning external auditor. It is unclear if the GFPS tool is linked to gender mainstreaming. It is linked. We will explain it later in the Q&A. All right, so for the indicators, most of them said they agree that it's clear, and these are the recommendations. Okay, last 33 seconds. In terms of the scoring guide, they said most of them agree that it's clear, but considering there are recommendations related to that as well. For the MOBs, similar. And of course, let me just go to the challenges. No, some LGUs requested for extension because of the ECQ. Some of the MOBs are not available because they're not in their offices. What else? For LGUs to tap the assistance of DILG, RGAD-C, and LLH. All right, so that's it. That's 25 minutes. Thank you very much. So this is the next step for PCW. Last slide. We will be preparing the profiling report. We will revise the tool based on the comments we generated from the pre-testing. Policy will be issued for the use of the GFPS assessment tool, and we will be coordinating with the DILG for the issuance of a policy for the LGU functionality assessment tool. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry to have so many things to share, and I need to rush. Thank you, Dr. Thank you so much.
Thank you po, Ma'am Narlene. Sorry po that we had to keep you within the prescribed 25-minute period. So thank you for the discussion, Ma'am Narlene Santos-Millar, on how we can ensure that LGUs and NGAs have a working mechanism for GAD mainstreaming. That is the GFPS, which is mandated in the Magna Carta of Women. The next tool to be presented is the GESIIA, or the Gender and Social Inclusion Impact Assessment Tool for Regulatory Policies. And we welcome again Jean Frances I. Ilio, who is the UPPAF Respond Gender Specialist. She's a former research associate of the Institute of Philippine Culture Ateneo de Manila University and the former WSAP, that's Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines president, an editorial board member of Feminist Economics, that's a journal, and an international corresponding editor of Australian Feminist Studies. Ma'am Jean Ilio has developed GAD tools, chief among which is the Harmonized Gender and Development Guidelines, ay yung tinatawag natin Hagadaga, si Ma'am Jean yan, which is being used by the Philippine government and its development partners. And we've been using it since 2004. Friends, it's my pleasure to welcome again Ma'am Jean Frances I. Ilio.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Now, I hope. Okay. Now, magandang hapon uli sa lahat. Diyos maray na hapon sa gabos. Maayong hapon sa tanan. Now, okay. My presentation will focus on Gender and Social Inclusion Impact Assessment, or GESIIA, which is an instrument that UPPAF Respond developed in 2020 as an input to the Regulatory Impact Assessment Manual of the Anti-Red Tape Authority, or Arta. The presentation will cover first an overview of GESIIA, then how gender and social inclusion lens is used in the regulatory impact assessment process, and what is the instrument all about that we call GESIIA. Now, what is GESIIA? The Gender Equality and Gender and Social Inclusion Impact Assessment provides a lens through which one can interrogate the distributional or equity impact of a regulation. Well, to help ensure quality government regulations, both existing and proposed, Republic Act 11032, or the Ease of Doing Business and Efficient Government Service Delivery Act of 2018, requires major regulations to be subjected to a regulatory impact assessment, or RIA. However, while regulations can help to improve the well-being of citizens and the competitiveness of business firms, some regulations can hurt particular groups, including women and marginalized communities, while benefiting the larger society or the economy. This is where GESIIA comes in and looks at the distributional or equity impact of the regulation. It takes into account not only gender inequalities, but also other attributes that bring about or are associated with social exclusion, marginalization, or disadvantage. GESIIA then asks the question, does the proposed or existing regulatory policy reduce, maintain, or increase gender inequalities and the vulnerabilities of socially excluded groups? In so doing, the instrument that we developed for the Arta Regulatory Impact Assessment Manual extends and expands the gender impact assessment that is used in many jurisdictions or many places. GIA or GIA asked the question, does the proposed or existing regulatory policy reduce, maintain, or increase the gender inequalities between women and men? So you can see the difference, how the GESIIA had reached out beyond gender to other attributes of social exclusion. Now, why should we do GESIIA? The 2015 OECD recommendation of the Council on Gender Equality in Public Life has set as an international standard the integration of gender impact assessments and gender considerations at early stages of development, implementation, and evaluation of policies and regulations. And this would involve aligning ex ante gender impact assessments with broader government-wide policy development processes such as RIA or RIA. Now, in the Philippines, we promote not only equality between women and men, but also non-discrimination on the basis of a lot of other things. Now, the Magna Carta of Women also provides for gender mainstreaming, including the assessment of policies and the inclusion of marginalized women in its declaration of policies. Let me quote from the Magna Carta Declaration of Policies with respect to the inclusion of marginalized women. And I quote, start a quote, "The state affirms women's rights as human rights and shall intensify its efforts to fulfill its duties under international and domestic law to recognize, respect, protect, fulfill, and promote all human rights and fundamental freedoms of women, especially marginalized women, in the economic, social, political, cultural, and other fields, without distinction or discrimination on account of class, age, sex, gender, language, ethnicity, religion, ideology, disability, education, and status. End of quote. In addition, the Philippines has several social inclusion related laws. We have the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, or IPRA, Social Reform and Poverty Alleviation Act, which was passed in 1998, which identifies basic sectors, and the Magna Carta of Disabled Persons, which was enacted in 1992. GESIIA rests on two clusters of concepts: gender, with emphasis on intersections and multiple vulnerability, and social inclusion and its associated notions of marginalization and disadvantage. Now, even the Philippine Development Plan, the current Philippine Development Plan, acknowledges with respect to women their multiple vulnerabilities. And as shown in the slide, uh, the quote from the Philippine Development Plan, which is women face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, such as women in poverty, women with disabilities, indigenous and Muslim women, women living in geographically inaccessible areas, and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women. Now, social inclusion, on the other hand, is the process, as defined by World Bank, is the process of improving the terms for individuals and groups to take part in society by improving the ability, opportunity, and dignity of those disadvantaged on the basis of their identity to take part in society. Linked with the discourses of gender and social inclusion or exclusion is the notion of marginalization and disadvantage, which signifies the lack of uh, or limited involvement in political, economic, or social spheres because of their sex, gender identity or sexual orientation, age, ethnicity, location, poverty, ethnicity, different ability, and faith. In countries with significant migrant or refugee populations, citizenship is a key differentiating attribute, resulting in the exclusion of migrants and refugees in the political, social, and economic life of society. But one should remember that a person can have multiple disadvantages or basis for marginalization or exclusion, and there are likely to be gender differences even within each marginalized group. But first, what is RIA? What is regulatory impact assessment? Uh, It is a tool to design and evaluate policies, laws, and regulations that are targeted, proportionate, accountable, transparent, and consistent. It involves a systematic process that examines the expected consequences of a range of alternative policy options that could be used to address a particular policy problem or issue. You would note, I think it would be very obvious at this point that the tool will be used is dedicated or has been designed to help agencies as well as LGUs with regulatory functions. So this is like a subset of the Philippine bureaucracy that is involved with regulations. Now, a survey done in connection with the preparation of the RIA manual by UPPAF Respond, found several principles of good practices in RIA, among which are enumerated in the slide. Establish clear reasons why government needs to regulate to address a particular problem. Probably a regulation is not needed, but some policy instrument. Consult in a meaningful and effective way with key stakeholders at all stages during the development and review of the regulation. Adopt the policy option that provides the greatest net benefit to the community, and examine the benefits and costs of a range of alternative policy options to address the problem, including regulatory and non-regulatory approaches, and also including status quo or no regulation. Of these good practices, two are of particular relevance to GESIIA. One is the adoption of the policy option that provides the greatest net benefit to the community. The other is the conduct of consultation in a meaningful and effective way with key stakeholders during the development and review of the regulation. The second principle, however, has to be interpreted as including women and marginalized groups that will be affected by the regulation among those considered as key stakeholders. This is the regulatory process, the Arta regulatory impact assessment process. Okay, the proponent agency defines the policy problem, considers policy options, and the proponent agency files advance notification with Arta that these are the likely regulatory problems that these are the regulatory problems we are encountering, and these are the options that we are considering. The proponent conducts preliminary impact assessment, which is like for those researchers, this is like your rapid rural assessment. Then the second step is proponent agency undertakes a RIA of the proposed policy options. So then the proponent agency conducts stakeholder consultations, prepares the draft impact statement or RIS, and submit the RIS to Arta for comment or approval. So from the definition of the policy problem to the submission of the draft RIS to Arta for comment and approval, those are things for proponent agencies to do. Now, once Arta receives the draft RIS on a particular proposed regulatory policy, Arta, or the Anti-Red Tape Authority, reviews the submitted draft RIS and approves the draft RIS and advises the proponent agency. So this is the RIA process of Arta. Now, where can we apply the GESIIA lens or the gender equality and social inclusion lens? At the very start, explore relevant GESIIA dimension of the policy problem. So at the very start pa lang. And in so doing, as the proponent agency considers policy option, also what are the GESIIA dimensions in each of the options? Now, when the agency is asked by Arta to undertake a full RIA, then you have GESIIA is one of the lenses that should be used in the RIA in the preparation of the regulatory impact assessment. Now, then at the point of consultation, the uh, the stakeholder analysis matrix and the stakeholder engagement plan should take into account the uh, marginalized groups that will be affected by the regulation as among the key stakeholders. Probably not all of them, but at least their representative organizations. Now, integrate a summary of the GESIIA result. The conduct of the GESIIA will not mean much if you're not able to integrate the results in the regulatory impact statement, which will be submitted to Arta. And Arta, when it reviews the RIS, checks for gender equality and social inclusion impacts. So this is how the GESI lens is used or can be used in the RIA process. Now, what are the GESIIA steps? First, determine who gets to benefit or to be included or not benefit or excluded. Next is assess the qualitative impact of the proposed regulation on women and marginalized or disadvantaged groups. The third is to estimate the gains and losses to the Philippine economy with their inclusion or exclusion. And lastly, summarize the GESIIA results and include this in the regulatory impact assessment. Now, if you look, this is the first worksheet. There are actually only 3 worksheets that constitute the GESIIA. The first important thing is identify the relevant marginalized groups. It could be fisher folks for fishery regulations, fisher folks that only the people involved in the fishery capture, but those part of the fishery value chain. So this will have to be, this will have the relevant marginalized groups have to be identified and written as sub-column headings here. And there is a question, who among the women's group will be affected by the regulation? So it could be women as part of the marginalized group or specific women because they play a very distinct role, for instance, in the value chain, like women entrepreneurs who are engaged in processing of fishery products, so on and so forth. Now, the question that is asked is, are these relevant marginalized groups likely to benefit or not? Why? And if they're likely to benefit, how? And if they're going to be negatively affected, if yes, how? Now, when we tested this last, I think that was the second week of May with Arta, we were piloting it. The comment of the group during the workshop was that it doesn't help if you only say yes or no, but you have to specify how they're likely to be benefited and how they're likely to be harmed by the proposed regulation. That's why the question how actually was included. Now, insofar as the second part of the initial social inclusion assessment is the involvement of the relevant marginalized groups in consultations. So, have they been represented? That is for stakeholder consultations that had already taken place, or will they be represented during consultations as the proponent agency, for instance, subjects its regulatory impact assessment uh, to the various stakeholders, or as they subject the regulatory impact assessment to stakeholders. And it's also important, how were they represented, or how will they be represented? For instance, for fisheries group, the question is having BIFAR, does consulting with BIFAR or with the BIFAR provincial offices, uh, would would that be adequate? Say, oh yeah, we are already, BIFAR should know what the fisher folks say. But the fisher folks associations may have different view, or may disagree with the government agencies' reading of their situation. So you have to be very careful in choosing what marginalized groups, how the what organizations of the marginalized groups to involve in the consultation process. Now, the second step has to do with assessment of the impact on women and marginalized groups. Now, for this, uh, the step explores the impact of barriers and opportunities that a proposed regulation would create for the relevant women's and marginalized groups on various domains or concerns, such as access to capital, access to social or health goods, services, and facilities, access to information about new policies or processes, access to markets, participation in the economy as production workers, entrepreneurs, or as unpaid care workers, and involvement in the RIA process.
Ma'am Jean, you have
So,
2 minutes. You have two
yes,
minutes
yes.
remaining po.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll be wrapping up soon.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now, after this, you will have to make an overall assessment of the effect of the regulation on relevant uh, women and marginalized groups and communities. Now, the third is assessing the impact of the on the Philippine economy as a result of their exclusion or inclusion. So, the step uh, focuses on the assessment of gains and losses as a result of the opportunities and barriers created by the regulation affecting capital, assets, or resources or services, investments, business operations or production levels, labor force participation and or employment, and others. The others very important because regulations will affect different areas of concern. So, what are the examples? Then again, you need to make an overall assessment of the losses and gains as a result of the inclusionary or exclusionary effect of the regulation. Now, these are examples of possible gains and losses. Number of jobs for women or men that will be created or lost in a sector or industry to be affected by the regulation. Created if the regulation will create opportunities, lost if the barriers actually would bring about closure of some businesses. Improved or more inferior working conditions for women and men workers in alternative work arrangements or non-permanent wage workers. Uh, and this could mean you have people moving from formal or permanent wage uh, employment jobs to the informal sector or to the non-permanent wage work. Now, as happened, for instance, in the case of regulations that forced, again, some industries to close down. Sometimes they just pay attention to the, let's say, the assembly plants that were closed, assembly car plants that were closed because of certain trade regulations, forgetting that probably these car assembly plants are sourcing materials uh, from different from different businesses, because so that what happens is that not only is the car assembly plants closing, but also probably some of their suppliers of car parts and other parts. So you have uh, probably people moving from permanent wage work to more inferior working conditions. Increased or reduced production of or output of women-owned enterprises, increased or reduced production levels owing to narrowed or widened gender gaps in access to production resources, or lower investments in industries with predominantly women workforce. Now, uh, how do you summarize the GESIIA results and how do you include this in the RIS? One should take into account again the results of the first three of the three worksheets, exclusion of particular marginalized groups from the possible benefits and the regulatory policy process, significant impact on women's and other marginalized groups, access and participation, and significant gains and losses to the economy. What are examples of GESIIA statement in the RIS? Uh, with respect to online payment system, and because there is a move to migrate uh, payment system for government services to online platforms, one workshop group that I worked with came up with this statement after they made the GESIIA. And it says the regulation will provide the unidentified sectors easier access to government services by migrating payment and processing of fees to online systems. So maganda siya. Okay, so this benefit to large population. This may also reduce incidents of corruption, bribery, and gender-based intimidation due to reduced face-to-face transaction. So meron kang Jesse related na issue na na-address din. However, the digital divide may hinder stakeholders from the marginalized sectors from experiencing the benefits of the proposed regulation. Yung hindi marunong mag-transact online, yung walang devices, yung walang makuha na Wi-Fi connection, at somebody even mentioned at yung visually impaired, how can they engage the online payment system? So that brought the question of the technical part of setting up the online system so it becomes more inclusive. Of course, nasa working out the system yun at nasa enforcement ng policy. Now, another has to do with access to improved agricultural service delivery. So, improved agricultural service will increase total food production and ensuring equal access to services by women and men. Agricultural holders will increase it further by XXX%, whatever that percentage is. An exercise we did on May 11 when we tested it with the Arta group using 2011 FAO data on the Philippines. The increase in total food production is in the vicinity of 1.9%, in the increase in women farmers' food production by 25%. What kind of information do we need for the GESIIA? You have to make use of qualitative data, especially when we work with indigenous peoples and So you have ethnographies or case studies or profiles or of sectors or industries. Now, this will have to be the qualitative data actually provide you context material to be used in conjunction with quantitative data, which are tabulated data from official statistical databases based on censuses and surveys, numerical information from administrative reports, and numerical or statistical data from research studies. These are some of the challenges. Currency of information, baka naman 20, ano pa yun, 1990 yung information, 1995 or 2000. Gaano ba ka-current yung information na yon? Availability of data and information disaggregated by sex, age and region, yan usually ang what's available, but little by gender and sexual identities, ethnicities, and formal and informal settlements. Then we also have to contend with changes in definitions and classifications over time. But a final note, these challenges should not deter a proponent agency from undertaking GESIIA, as an agency can incorporate GESIIA-related questions in plans for primary data collection in aid of policymaking. Should it be limited to secondary data sources, it could still focus on inequalities between groups and between women and men on concerns where data are available. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po, Ma'am Jean Ilio, for highlighting the importance of assessing the impacts and potential impacts of policies, laws, and regulations on women, gender diverse individuals, and other marginalized sectors, and for elaborating on how the GESIIA tool can be effectively utilized for this. Because we have a long list of questions which were submitted during the Zoom registrations, Ma'am Narlene has already very kindly addressed the new questions addressed to her in the Q&A box. So please check this box. The last tool to be discussed this afternoon is the Moral Capability Assessment Tool, or Mcat. And we are most fortunate to have with us all the way from the UK, Dr. Lara Bianchi, who is an assistant professor in business and society at the University of Nottingham, where she works on vulnerable groups and extreme forms of exploitation. Prior to this, she worked as the program lead for the Business and Human Rights Catalyst at Alliance Manchester Business School. In partnership with the Ateneo de Manila University, she has been recently awarded a Global Challenge Research Fund for investigating the normalization of abuses in conflict-affected societies and how this impacts on women's development. Hence, let's please welcome all the way from the UK, Dr. Lara Bianchi.
Hi, hello, thank you very much. I'll try to share my screen, please, if you can confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect, thank you very much. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you to Ma'am Jean and Professor Salomon from the Ateneo de Manila for this invitation. It's great to be at least virtually there with you. I'm in the UK, it's raining, not a nice day, so, and it's very early in the morning, so I'll try my best and try to talk to you about what we are developing in partnership with the Ateneo de Manila. My name is Lara. I'm an assistant professor at the business school in Nottingham, and I work on women's rights and female workers in global value chains. What I will present you this morning is one part of a big project, the Mcat project, the Moral Capability Assessment Tool, which was funded by the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is a UK funding part. And I'm sure all of you would agree that gender inequality and women empowerment is, as such, very much a global issue. It's not something that relates only to developing countries or specific countries, but it is across the globe. our project is a fairly big project. We have, as mentioned, two main academic partners, the University of Nottingham and Ateneo de Manila. We have a crucial key community partner, which is Scopers, the Center of Psychological Extension and Research Services. They are based in Davao, and they do great work in the community in Mindanao. Then we have the New Vic, which is a theater here based in the UK, and I will explain in a bit why the participation of a theater was actually pretty crucial in the development of our tool. And then we have Macman, which is a digital company, and the digital company was absolutely essential given the pandemic, because we had to move our tool to an online tool. So our tool is actually something that can be accessed digitally. So before I start to describe what we are trying to do with our tool, I wanted to share with you some considerations that we had before starting this project. First of all, our focus is working with women in conflict-affected societies. And in particular, in general, we look at context fragility as one of the main causes for reinforcing gender discrimination. Of course, as we all know, women are usually very good at being resilient. They are very resilient, which is absolutely positive. But sometimes being resilient means also lower the bar and normalize abuses, coping with abuses that shouldn't be allowed. And this is specifically and particularly true in conflict-affected societies, well, where, of course, violence is daily happening. Another consideration that we had was, yes, it's important to talk about women economic empowerment. However, without boosting women's social empowerment, so they're finding their place in the society and trying to tackle gender inequality, it would be very difficult for them to achieve a proper economic empowerment. And then one last consideration that I want to share with you is, I'm not an activist, I'm an academic before being an activist, but this is a point I care particularly about. Women are not vulnerable per se. We talk very often about the vulnerability of women. But as a matter of fact, I think that women become vulnerable because of the social context, because of where they live, because of the conditions and the reinforcement of gender inequality that happens in society, particularly in societies that have been affected by man-made or natural-made disasters. So going back to our project, we had one main objective that was building an engagement that could have been a meaningful engagement for women, with women, and putting them back at the center of sustainable peace and development. And the research sites, we started with Mindanao in the Philippines. We are moving on to Peshawar in Pakistan, another conflict-affected society, as I'm sure you know. And when we designed the tool, the scope was precisely to build something that could have been context sensitive, could have been very much focused on the specific context, but also scalable and applicable to other communities affected by some of the same challenges that are common in conflict-affected societies. So why on earth a business school, a world-leading business school, should research on women's rights and meaningful engagement? I think this is important to understand because this is not something, gender inequality is not something that should be relegated to development studies. This should be very much something that is mainstream in business and management studies as well. So first of all, as you all know, I'm sure, the role of business in society is changing. Now there is a higher level of expectation that businesses would behave well in society. Businesses are a crucial actor in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the key points in business and in the business and society discourse is the development of stakeholder engagement, which is a management tool that is effective to both businesses, but also to the people involved. And specifically on what we are trying to do, there is a pressing call from intergovernmental organizations, the UN, but also OECD, that what is needed for conflict-affected societies are actually heightened actions. So basically what they are saying is that you cannot pretend to implement a tool which is a traditional tool in a context that has been affected heavily by insurgencies and daily violence, basically. So whatever you're doing, if you are investing or if you are operating in a society that has been affected by conflict, you need to do so using non-traditional methods and non-traditional approaches to engagement. Our tool has been designed for any kind really of organizations that are working on the ground in these societies. So we started to look mainly at international development and peace building agencies, but actually we realized that civil society organizations, both local and international organizations, can be beneficiaries of these tools, as well as companies. And we use, these organizations are intermediaries, beneficiaries, to reach women at the end of the day. So we are building a training for these organizations in order for these organizations to do something more meaningful for women. So the limits of traditional engagement practices. Engagement, stakeholder engagement is extremely common. Pretty much all organizations have it. However, very often is just a tick box exercise where women, yes, they are called into focus groups maybe, or workshops, but they're seen as passive recipients of the discussion. So what happens is that I'm in my office in Geneva, for example, or in Manila. I decide that I want to run a project with women in Marawi, and I go there and I share my view and my project. But as a matter of fact, I already decided what I want to do. And many organizations, which are the engagers, often are pretty much happy and content just to have that process, just to say, yes, I had my stakeholder engagement, now I can move on. And they don't look too much at the outcomes from that engagement, because probably they pre-decided the policies that they wanted to implement. Another aspect that we are looking at, and that's related to our title, which is moral capability. Moral capability is your capability to understand what is right and what is wrong, and to be an active agent, to have your agency in the participation process. Many organizations give for granted that if I invite some women to my focus groups, for example, they will be willing to share with me their concerns or their opinions. And that's not always the case, because especially in conflict-affected societies, women normalize the fact that they don't have a voice and that their voice might be not so worth it to share. So what we are trying to do is trying to deliver the message that actually meaningful engagement is key in this kind of context, and must be characterized by pluralism. So you need to have an open inclusion, and you need to be ready to include different views in your discussion. And this can actually empower women. And for the empowerment to happen, you need to have an encounter which is unhierarchical, where the conversation is among peers, where there is no an engager, the organization, which is at the top of the dialogue, and the engage, which is just a passive actor in your conversation. And then for the engagement to be meaningful, as an output, as an outcome, more than an output of the engagement, you need to have a transformative social change. So you need to have something that changes in the lives or the thinking maybe of the people that you engaged. So if they leave your focus group without actually any kind of empowerment or advantage or new achievement, probably your engagement has not been as successful as should have been. In our approach, the engager, so the organization, is seen as the main learner. So you need to have an authentic dialogue, a conversation, which is between the engager and the engaged, and it's not top-down. Both parties need to maintain control and ownership of the engagement process. And the issue, you need to be open, as we said, to discuss issues from different perspectives, and to be ready to act on considerations that are made and maybe that were not exactly in line with your initial plans. The aim is to promote very much a reciprocal learning. So you need to engage women if you're willing to learn from them, not only teach to them something. And then you need to be ready to activate and to promote a process of change. So what I'm describing today is, as I said, a part of the Mcat tool, which is a digital training package. And the trainees would be organizations that are willing to run meaningful participatory processes with women. The tool and the training employs an art-based and creative methodology, which is called cultural animation. And this is why one of our partners is a theater. And when you run as an engager cultural animation workshops, you employ a mixture. It's not just a dialogue, it's not just a conversation based on words, but you employ a mixture of creative tasks and games and discussions, of course. And the scope is to discuss and share a desirable future. Here is a quote from Plato, who said, you can discover more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. Having just plain conversations with women very often is not a solution, is not effective enough. So we are promoting an engagement through playfulness with what we call cultural animation that aims at building trusting relationship between participants. So the first games, for example, are made to put at ease the participants and to deliver the message that we are all equal, at least in that occasion, and all the voices are very much counted. We work together in games, through games, and the starting point is a picture of the present. So what each participant consider to be their conditions in society. And then we try to imagine and share a possible future. So we are here, where do we want to go? And of course, through games, we are promoting multiple ways of knowing. There is knowing, the production of knowledge can be experiential, practical, and of course includes also performative knowledge. We run, the last workshop that we ran in person was in Kenya, in Taita Taveta, a year ago. And women in that occasion composed a song, which was a beautiful output of the workshop. So they use music as a way of designing a desirable future, saying which were their concerns and where they wanted to go in the future. Something for the trainees, so for the organizations that we included in the training package, is also the use of magic. We have in the training package some short videos, which are touch points, in which one of our professors, Professor Todd Landman, who is also a magician, try to disrupt the knowledge of the trainee, of the future engager, try to questioning their approach to engagement, trying to deliver the message that context sensitivity is pretty crucial when you decide to build a participatory process. These are examples. So before, of course, building and designing the training, we tested ourselves the approach of engaging in different settings. You see a picture of a boat that was an output from a workshop here in Yorkshire, in the UK. And then you have women from Japan. That was a community in a village affected by the tsunami. And then, as I mentioned, the group of women from Taita Taveta in Kenya. So we tested the tool, not the tool per se, but the approach that then we translated into the tool in different settings to see what could be the main learning from different societies and the common challenges that women actually face. So through our approach, the engager becomes very much a cultural animator, and the organization which has gone through the training can then employ a cultural animation approach for the engagement of women. And we consider this approach a direct answer to the call of heightened and non-traditional stakeholder engagement approach. As I mentioned, our main points are: you need to activate women's voice and agency, and this can happen through playfulness. You need to co-create meaningful outcomes. You cannot go there for during the engagement process and preempt basically the outcomes, knowing already what you are going to do. You need to be ready to be open and change your plans depending on the outcomes of the engagement. And of course, the success is not just on the process per se, but you need to track the outcomes of that process and be sure that actually the desirable future that was discussed during the workshop has been taken in consideration in the design of policies or project. So where we are, we started our project. First of all, our project has been mainly developed during the pandemic, which has not been easy because, of course, I'm here in the UK. My colleagues are back in Manila, and then we have some colleagues back in Davao. So it's not easy. It has been very challenging, but we managed to finalize the training tool. It is now under testing with some volunteers in Davao. We will have first workshops, so the volunteers that are taking the training will test the feasibility of the cultural animation approach in 2 workshops with women, one in Talangoid and the other in Marawi. We will collect feedback and learnings both from the trainees and women, and then we will start our second trial in Peshawar. So a long way to go, and I'm very excited about the project. I think stakeholder engagement per se is a buzzword at the moment, without a real consideration of how to make that tool more meaningful to the end users, to the women in the communities. And I think I've been very good, and I stick to my time, and I'm happy to take questions after. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lara Bianchi. Yes, you have actually a minute more to go, but no more. You have 3 more minutes. So thank you very much for staying way within your time allotment, and for introducing us to a most innovative tool that truly embodies the principles we hold dear as gender advocates, gendered participatory processes, women's agency, and women as legitimate producers and co-producers of knowledge. Now we will proceed to our panel discussion. The discussants will be given 10 minutes each, and I will again gently interrupt at the 9-minute mark this time. Our first discussant is Hamilcar B. Chanhueco Jr., or Ham, who is a gay, young feminist, human rights activist, and GAD practitioner. In June 2017, he founded Mindanao Pride, an organization comprised of individuals with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, or SOGI-esque, gender equality advocates, and human rights activists. Ham is a certified member of the PCW National Gender and Development Resource Pool and has provided technical assistance in gender mainstreaming to several government agencies, including the National Youth Commission. Currently, he serves as the head of the Office of the Vice President's GAD Technical Working Group and works on the anti-poverty alleviation program called Angat Buhay. So let's please welcome Ham Chanhueco Jr.
Thank you, Prof. Hello, there.
We can hear you,
Prof.
Ham.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that generous introduction, Prof. Nancy. There. So that's my presentation. Okay, maayong adlaw sa tanan, and good afternoon. First, I would just like to thank UPPAF Respond for making a space for young LGBT individuals like me to contribute to gender equality and women's empowerment, and for having a space this afternoon. So my commentary is a bifurcate of our experience in OVP as one of the respondents of the GFPS FAT pre-testing, and my analysis as a GAD practitioner. So first, there, next slide. Next slide, please. So the GFPS FAT is useful in data gathering and analyzing information. The results can then provide a database for government instrumentalities to assess the effectiveness of GFPS. The tool is more appropriate to those who see the bigger picture of the agency and its GAD mainstreaming efforts. Next slide, please. There. So these are some of the pros of the positive notes that I see, and also of OVPs, when we conducted the pre-testing. Second, the design is specifically for GFPS members. The framework was specifically developed to fit in the reality of the gender focal point system of agencies. It is accessible, flexible, and designed to accommodate changes over time. It is also systematic and uses familiar categories and concepts. The framework does not rely on new or unique concepts, but instead employs once familiar terms to GFPS. Excuse me. Next, it raises awareness of the importance of institutional analysis. The tool emphasizes that institutional analysis is an important part of an organizational commitment to promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, and enables organization to translate the analysis into action. Last but not the least, the requirement to gather relevant document or MOVs is based on fact and not theory. I believe that it is effective to generate accurate and factual data on the functionality of GFPS, and it proves that all functions exist were completed, objectives and outputs were achieved, and the project outcome has been reached. So for some potential limitations, next slide please. For some potential limitations, first is that the indicators can encourage the GFPS to have the tick the boxes approach on data collection. GFPS can end up feeling overly confident, assuming that they know all they need to know, thereby missing the complexities of the culture and context of the institution, which also leads to the next limitation that it may not address the culture and context of the institutions. The tool assumes that agencies have the same level of structure and might be neutral to power relations. And last but not the least, the GFPS FAT can seem to be specific and demanding, quote and unquote. Utilization of the tool might be difficult to use fully in instances where the institution has little to no or no knowledge at all on gender development, and it tends to assume that leadership has knowledge or prioritizes GAD mainstreaming, thus leaving out some crucial motivational factors and constraints, such as political and cultural values. So for some recommendations, next slide, please. For some recommendations, first, to integrate a follow-through qualitative data gathering through narrative, interviews, focus group discussion for contextualization. Questions on how and why can be considered through the tool, thereby encouraging the GFPS to analyze thoroughly and avoid the tick the boxes approach. Next would be to tailor fit criteria and scoring guide based on the nature or the type of agency. Given that agencies do not have the same structure, for example, OVP doesn't have any attached agencies, it is recommended to tailor fit the criteria and scoring guide depending on the nature or type of agency. Alternatively, to add a non-applicability option and some score adjustments. This will contribute to a clear, realistic scores and reflective of the agency situation. And last, the head of agency, this is more of like a request, but I think this may also be a recommendation. So the head of the agency or next in rank wear many hats, and we are all aware of this, especially for those who work in the government, thus increasing the risk of relegating GAD concerns on the sidelines. So may I recommend that the designation of GFPS chairperson may also be open to any of the agency's executive committee members with an assistant secretary or a director level position, to ensure that GAD is being focused on and taken action to, and to give value to EXICO members that serves as GFPS chair. Next part would be my comments on the GESIIA tool. There. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. So first is the emphasis on empowerment approach. I believe that the tool recognizes that women experience is very varied, tempered by other factors such as class, race, age, and so on. So it has an intersectionality approach into it. The tool recognizes the challenge of unequal gender relations and also of women's empowerment. It does also a balance on law and the lived experience. I believe that the framework is focused on evaluating, while the framework is focused on evaluating a policy, which is an important driver of individual outcomes. I think that it is not only focused on the framework, but also the development framework places its attention on the individual person. It focuses its attention on the empirical experience of individuals. And last, it acknowledges sexual and gender minorities, particularly of the lesbian, bisexual, and trans woman. Sexual orientation and gender identity as emerging issues in development, no? And these populations have been excluded from institutions central to human and economic development, such as healthcare, education, labor markets, and welfare systems. Still, the issue of whether sexual and gender minorities should be included in development efforts continues to be contested, but this tool and respond to that. However, the tool's acknowledgement is limited only to the LBDT only and doesn't include or highlights other SOGI such as the intersex people with widely differing bodies, experiences, and identities. In ending, let me take this opportunity to thank our speakers and other organizations and the other organizations that they represent for the creation of another set of helpful tools for GAD advocates and your ceaseless pursuit for women's empowerment, gender equality, and social inclusion. Daghang salamat.
Thank you very, very much, Ham, for your very concise reaction. Now, to share her views, we have Maria Daryl Eleyesa, who is a longtime advocate of the rights of women, particularly those in rural areas and socially excluded groups. Daryl is a former Secretary General of the Pambansang Koalisyon ng Mga Kababaihan sa Kanayunan, or PKKK, and is presently the project coordinator of the PKKK Sexual Health and Empowerment Project. She and other rural women activists drafted a Magna Carta of Rural Women, which has been merged into the Magna Carta of Women. She helped develop the fisheries sector GAD checklists. Daryl is a member of the PCW National GAD Resource Pool, working principally with agricultural and rural development agencies and organizations. So friends, let's please welcome Maria Daryl Eleyesa.
Thank you, Prof. Natsi. First, thank you everyone again for this opportunity, and it is a privilege to be healthy and be able to share my thoughts with you this afternoon, especially that it is a feat in this time of pandemic. So parang ang sarap po talagang sabihin na mabuhay po tayong lahat. Okay, so I will go directly to the point. My presentation will center on how GESIIA can safeguard the rights of rural women, which is the sector that I represent. But first of all, I'd like to share this phrase, if you can see it already. Can you see it already? The do not assume, no, do not assume. For many of us here who are students of Ms. Jean Ilio, we have trained with her on the Harmonized GAD guidelines, and by now for sure we must have learned this by heart, that we should not assume, or am I assuming already? But the thing is, with the tool, it helps us to ask questions at the early stages of development, and it is crucial in checking our assumptions. So what does this mean for the rural women? Well, I will be basing examples from the realities of rural women from the issues that we have recently encountered. For instance, when we ask who will be disproportionately affected by the regulation, when we talk about food security, which is the closest to our heart, it addresses the assumption that food trade regulation is all about food. It is not. The question probes about food producers who are not equally recognized and therefore not equally protected by this regulation policy. And in case of livelihood displacement, they are not guaranteed to benefit from the safety nets. Why so? Because, for instance, an example here is the registry system, basic sectors in agriculture, wherein it is a prerequisite for accessing the safety net programs, but up to now, it is still mainly male-dominated. So another example, so this is a photo of the many women who I believe were not consulted at all by this law, by the enactment of this rice tarification law. So this is one way of showing our sentiments, but if they have been asked in the first place, then the policymakers would have known that, yes, they will be the ones disproportionately affected by the regulation. Another example, when we ask about the barriers and opportunities, again, for us, it would help address the assumption that exclusion is not a simple list. It's not just being delisted from something, but really it looks into institutional and structural barriers that persist despite affirmative actions. So for example, in agrarian reform, policy-wise, there has already been equal land fighting for men and women, but upon further investigation, there are still some regional offices, for instance, that did not even bother to change the registration forms. So what do I see as a potential of the GESIIA? If it is done as part of monitoring and evaluation of the enforcement of the regulation on a regular basis, of course, then the GESIIA can counter-check the baseline information, since these are also changing over time. So as we also learned from rapid gender analysis, this is what we call the imperfection principle. So it is very important for us to ask these questions as checking our assumptions. GESIIA can also facilitate the right to self-determination by asking this question again: have they been represented? Will they be represented, and how? So what does this mean for us? So these are relevant in ensuring substantive and not just token representation of groups. And for Indigenous women, perhaps this would translate to substantive participation in processes like the free, prior, informed consent, because we are also aware that still there are tribal justice and governance systems and practices that are still heavily male-dominated. For women, for example, who are there in affected communities by environmentally hazardous projects, they can be able to establish their stake in environment impact assessment processes. So this we can equally expect that the interventions or responses from EIA processes would go beyond alternative livelihood projects, because we see that often that the response to environmental impact assessments would be to offer livelihood. But when we talk with women who are very passionate over losing their their livelihoods and their ecosystems, I think they would not settle for alternative livelihoods. No alternative livelihood can quell their resistance to such projects. So another example is for women, girls, LGBTQIA members who need to be heard on policies regulating access to sexual, reproductive health and rights services and commodities. Because after all, when we talk about right to self-determination, it is not just about the political territory, the geographical location, but it is also what's most important to every one of us here, which is our bodily autonomy. So I hope that the GESIIA can also explore that when we talk about the barriers, when we talk about issues on how would be the benefits and losses for us, it will also talk about the most personal, which is our bodily autonomy, reproductive sexual rights. Overall, I think the GESIIA is rights-based and people-centered, and this is very important, especially in situations when we encounter tensions, when there are tensions between sectors and even policy commitments. So if there are laws that really run counter to each other. But with the GESIIA, we can use this as evidence, no? And we can use this as basis for pointing out compelling evidence that can help the decision makers. So for instance, again, let's go back to the rights tarification law. So when we look at the different sectors being affected by it, then it can help, the results can help navigate the interests of the consumers and the producers. So may intersection, no? Intersectoral then. And when we look at environment, for example, for environment and energy regulations, which we see much tensions now, no? It can help decision makers to balance the weight of the demand for energy, the affected host community, and even future generations. So these are just examples on the potential use of GESIIA. As advocates also, we see this as one way of drawing out evidence and making our arguments more compelling. I remember it has been, I think, in the concluding comments on CIDO to the Philippines, one recommendation there has been to look at the impact of macroeconomic policies, the trade policies that we have on the marginalized sectors. I think it is high time to really respond to that recommendation, and we can even use GESIIA for that, to answer to that. So just to emphasize again, why do we need to weigh not just the impact to current current population, but also to even future generations, because I believe we are accountable to the next generations, especially when we talk about climate change or climate justice. In the same way that we hold accountable the corporations, the G7 countries on their historical responsibility to climate change. So what I see here is really potential use of the GESIIA for our advocacies. Okay, so for Mcat, my 2 cents worth for Mcat, what really stuck with me is these two words, no, meaningful engagement, but in an hierarchical setting. So it's really very exciting, and it has been shown that it is possible when there's the right layout, right design, and mindset. But we all know that the hierarchical setting is a work by itself. No, it's something that we also want to achieve. And what really intrigues me now, what I want to say is that, is it possible also to integrate, to mix the two, this process of Mcat with the GESIIA? How can we incorporate this aspiration of having meaningful engagement in an hierarchical setting in the process of data gathering, data collection, and data presentation that is integrated in the whole RIA process? So I think that would be really interesting. But also just to note, that the learner-centered, context-based, solution-oriented digital tool, which is the Mcat, already corresponds what we as organizers also promote and practice, the popular feminist pedagogy, and where the end goal is social transformation. And more importantly, the process outcome is really to be able to build safe spaces and courageous spaces for women and girls, LGBTQIA and PWDs from various contexts. So congratulations that Mcat is now being tested in Mindanao, here in the Philippines. Just to say that PKKK has also areas in Mindanao. So in the language of the millennials, Bekenaman, we welcome the tool if we need further trials. So that's it. And thank you again to all our presenters and to our participants.
Thank you very much, Maria Daryl Elayesa, for also staying within the time allotment. And last but not least, to provide her insights, let us welcome Professor Aurora Havate de Dios, or Oyi, who is a Senior Project Director of the Women and Gender Institute and an Associate Professor in International Studies at Miriam College. She is a former member of the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women and Philippine representative to the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children. She's also former chair of the National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women, which is, as we know now, the Philippine Commission on Women, and the first president of WSAP. She's a consultant on gender issues, gender peace and security, and migration, and a co-convener of the Women's Peace Collective. Ma'am Oyi.
Thank you. I hope Muriel was able to get the revised PowerPoint that I sent her. Muriel, okay. Is this the revised PowerPoint?
Yes, Ms. Oyi.
Okay, salamat. I'm speaking as from the perspective of the former chair of the National Commission on Women, having I think it was during my time that this was first developed, the GAD harmonized guidelines, and also as an expert of CEDAW. And I think these unique perspectives give me a little bit more leeway to be a little less positive, but not too critical. So I promise I won't be too critical. Next, next, please. Can I have? Okay, so I'd like to point out that this is about the PCW presentation. I think the Philippines has been acknowledged as one of the earliest proponents of gender mainstreaming, having introduced the concept more than 40 years ago. So we're a little bit more senior than other countries as far as gender mainstreaming is concerned. It has also been one of the countries to systematize and update its system of integrating gender into the mainstream of government policies, procedures, and processes. So for that reason, we are quite proud that this has been the model that many countries in Asia has looked upon as their model. And singularly, the harmonized guidelines for GAD planning and budgeting stand out as a tool that has been utilized by government agencies in order to understand gender. And the PCW-GPS assessment tool is yet another tool to enhance, update the internal competence of GAD officers to update their knowledge and expertise using this time around numerical indicators as well as some other categories. Next, please. So having said that, while the aim is to assess the functionality of the system in place and track the progress therein, the effect is to make gender mainstreaming in government even more bureaucratic focus and a bit complicated. The system is too internally focused on functionality rather than on outcomes and results. I think it needs to be balanced with attention to the outcomes and results on the impact of women's lives, which is the ultimate objective of the enhanced system. So for instance, I'm quite wondering why it stops at functionality and not on effectiveness. Because if we're going to assess the functionality according to the knowledge and expertise of the directors and government officers, the functionality in my mind should be extended into to what extent have they been effective in doing their functions, which is ultimately to serve the interest of women. And that is not mentioned at all. As the system is exclusively for government officials, there has been no discussion on how it might involve civil society in the private sector, which are essential to the effectiveness, not just the functionality of the system internally, but outwardly in the society we move in. After all, gender mainstreaming is not exclusive to God and should not exclusively just end at enhancing the expertise of our government officials. But to what extent can they extend that expertise in order to achieve greater goals that synchronize with the social goals of the government itself? Next, please. So I think for the PCW, those are just my comments, because I think that it can be extended and it should be balanced with qualitative indicators that look at how it can relate directly to their function as channels and catalysts for change on the lives of women. That is another project, by the way. Now, on the issue of Mcat, I think the Mcat is similar to what NGOs and community-based organizations has been referring to as the rights and gender-sensitive approach in working with communities and women. It emphasizes the adherence to basic respect of human rights of everyone, regardless of gender, class, or creed, and an awareness of the need to acknowledge the differential needs and interests of women and men, particularly in conflict and conflict situations. During the actual conflict itself, we need to prioritize the need for security, safe space and sustenance, and even psychological first aid of women and their families. We've seen this in emergency situations in 7, 8 communities that we have studied over the last 10 years. Next, please. In these initiatives, it is important that women play a critical role, and they have performed this role as first responders, organizing the community while in flight, and during temporary settlements in evacuation centers. I think what I'm saying is that the timing of this, it has to be specified when this project is going to be implemented, because I think that, you know, the different stages of survival, settlement in evacuation centers, and the post-conflict situation that assures a transitional period of relative peace are different stages when programs can realistically be implemented. So it cannot be during the crucial period of flight, the crucial period of survival, but it may be placed somewhere between the transition period of relative peace or the communities that have already been relocated. Then and only then can we expect program as MCAT, MCAT, which can realistically start not, and I emphasize it, not just as an isolated program, but in complementation with other existing programs on the ground, particularly those organized by the women, Muslim women in the area. Since Muslim women have experienced prolonged displacement for decades, I have known families that have been displaced and have known only this kind of life for the last 20 years. They have been displaced over time, and they have developed women leaders among themselves. So for us who are third parties and coming in and giving interventions in the community, I think let us disabuse ourselves that we alone can develop them as leaders. I think they themselves have been leaders on their own. What we can only do is to work with them and enhance their leadership and their agency in dealing with their situation. And in any planning and implementation of new programs, we need to listen to the voices of those who have the most profound knowledge as to how they have survived under situations of conflict. So the first thing that we actually did, as I said, although we have been working with Muslim women, was to conduct socioeconomic surveys for economic and political empowerment. And what we have found out, the data that showed us, is that all, if not many of our assumptions, were actually wrong. We're believing that women are ready for leadership training. That's our assumption, and that the only thing that they would need is this kinds of training so that they can stand up against their husband, they can lead the community to evacuation centers and all of that. And what we have found stunned us. First, that women have been so deprived of their rights and have been deprived of reproductive and sexual services that they are mostly tied up to childbearing and child rearing. Therefore, making them unable to participate in any meaningful decision-making or political participation. Secondly, that they are not willing to become leaders because the domestic situation is that they will face the wrath and the hostility of their husbands, as well as the hostility of other relatives. And the third is that violence is pervasive in the daily lives of women, not only through domestic violence, but the situation of conflict exposes them to constant threat of rape and other physical injuries. In evacuation centers, for example, they do not have safe spaces. They have unhealthy conditions. So many are using the toilet, and the source of water is far away. So these are some of the real conditions that have educated us that unless we address the daily needs and the domestic problems that they have, I think women will not really be ready to take on leadership. As many as 80% of the women have told us, no, we don't want to become leaders. We only want to be voters. Be that
Ma'am Oyi, I'll just flag you. You're overtime na po, but please.
okay.
Please
Last na
continue.
lang
Yes,
po.
ma'am.
Be
Opo.
it may, I'm saying that not all Muslim women are ready. There are budding young feminists, young men and women who have come up and showed their potential for leadership. And we're working with this group of young women as well as old women, mostly daughters and relatives of politicians. But I think we have a long, long way to go to improve to have the kind of enabling conditions that will make our women ready for this. It is a wonderful idea to have creativity and artistic things to be incorporated into our work with the villages, and they deserve it. They deserve these types of playfulness as well as artistic channels where they can also express themselves. And we have also been working with women in Marawi to produce bags that have been marketed by Pen Shop. And this is another point that I'd like to emphasize, that in doing so, we have to keep in mind to try our best to link them up with the market, the local market, and the national market in order for have some prospect of economic empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Oyi, for those very grounded insights, and also, of course, from Ham and Daryl. Having heard from our presenters and discussants, we will now go to the open forum where we can take just perhaps a few questions. Again, the queries in the chat box have almost entirely been responded to by presenters, and we thank our presenters for taking the time and the effort to respond to these questions. So we will now focus on the questions that were submitted during the Zoom registration, and we still have time for a couple of them. And there were several questions that were submitted ahead of time. We have 400 participants and many of them have submitted questions. So I'll start with questions that were addressed to our three presenters. So this is Nardine, Ma'am Jean, and also Lara. This question, it comes in two parts. I put together two questions. Under what context are the tools you discussed appropriate, and have these tools been tested elsewhere, meaning in other countries? Would like to respond first.
I'll take a shot.
Yes, Ma'am Jean.
Yeah. As I have indicated in my presentation, what has been used in many countries is the gender impact assessment. So what we have developed for the Philippines is to integrate social inclusion in the assessment process. Okay, so because there are issues that are broader and deeper sometimes than gender inequalities. Although there are gender inequalities embedded in many of these inequalities. So that is, and the context, I think, as I've also indicated in my presentation, that this is principally for used by regulatory agencies. And the object is to help them think through the regulatory policy and the regulatory problem and the options that they are considering. I stop.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Jean. And perhaps Ma'am Narlene or Lara, would you like to respond to the question about, yes?
Yeah.
What context
Let
are
me
they
just
appropriate?
thank you, Dr. Nancy.
Yes,
First of all,
ma'am.
I'd like to thank Chair Oyi for her insights and recommendations on the tool. We would really look into your recommendations and see how we can incorporate that in terms of enhancing it or in finalizing the GFPS, the functionality assessment tool. Since this is still in the piloting stage, it has not been applied yet by the Philippine government. It has been applied by those who pre-tested it, but we're telling them that this is not the final rating. It's just an assessment to help us, to help the PCW get feedback from them in terms of the usefulness of the tool. So I am not sure if other countries have developed a similar tool in terms of assessing their focal point system, but I think this is the first of its kind in ASEAN, and maybe if we enhance it and consider the suggestions of Ham and Chair Oyi, we'd be able to have a very good tool that we can advocate internationally later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Narlene. What about Lara?
Yeah, so I want to link actually my reply to what Ma'am Aurora was saying earlier about when it's right to implement a tool like the Mcat tool. And when we first started to work on the project, we tended to call to say that we were targeting post-conflict societies. So of course, this is not something that you can do during an actual conflict. However, the conflict cycle is very fluid. So at least in academia, we don't like to talk anymore about post-conflict per se, because so we prefer to talk about conflict-affected societies. And of course, it's up to the organizations to decide when is the right time to implement and to adopt a tool like the Mcat, which wouldn't be appropriate in a vivid live conflict. The tool per se has been tested, is being tested in Mindanao, but one of the requirements of the funder was to make it scalable. So we hope, because of commonalities between conflict-affected societies, we hope that the tool actually can be implemented in pretty much across all the conflict-affected societies in Southeast Asia. And as I mentioned during my presentation, the next trial will be in Peshawar, Pakistan.
Betsy?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
The GESIIA is also being tested. The testing began May 10 and 11 with Arta, and it will be tested with 4 batches of agencies, of 5 agencies each, so that we tested 20. And it doesn't cover, GESIIA doesn't cover regulations that have been that are through the legislative process.
Okay.
GESIIA doesn't cover that, so therefore GESIIA doesn't cover that. This is in response to a question that was posed in the Q&A box. But what we can do is to advocate, it's a different advocacy route. We'll probably work with KKK and PCW on how we can make the legislators look at the aspects that we are promoting under GESIIA. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ma'am Jean. Okay, maybe I'll ask a question that's directed again to the 3 of you before I go to some individual questions. Can you share situations wherein you use the tools and this resulted in a significant action related to GAD? So they want you to share success stories, essentially, in the utilization of the tools. So I think that would be interesting also to know.
I can start if you want.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So the training tool has been designed for this project specifically. So it is under testing at the moment, and we don't know if it's going to be successful. But we tested the approach, the cultural animation approach, in different settings. And one of them was in Kenya with a community of artisanal miners, women with very bad living conditions. And what we obtained at the end of the cultural animation workshop was a proper path of engagement between these local women and the government. So we managed to have some participants from the national government to these workshops that basically co-created with women desirable future and listened to them in a sort of a peer situation. So that it was great. It was a very open dialogue, because when you play a game, it's difficult to maintain hierarchies. So it's easier to just be a player in the game. And so, that brought to an ongoing dialogue with the national government. And we thought that was a great achievement from that project.
Yeah, that is a significant achievement. What about Ma'am Jean and Ma'am Nerdy? Yes, Ma'am Jean.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to check with Lara, because when we talk about stakeholder consultation, actually the Mcat is a very powerful tool that can be used, especially when working with indigenous peoples, where a lot of facilities will be established as a part of improving the online system and so on and so forth. So it's something probably that, again, we can work with. The PKK and other civil society organizations that are into organizing. But it's so far as this is a very new tool, a very new instrument. But what it can do actually, potentially, is to affect how decisions are made with respect to policy, the choice of policy options, regulatory policy options. So the potential is great, but then it really depends on the quality of the assessment and how receptive the regulatory agencies are to. But then Arta will be checking it when it reaches them. They say, what's the just impact? So we have worked with the Arta group, and the Arta young people, because they're fairly young, are very enthusiastic about the adoption of the GESIIA.
Okay.
Similar to
forward-looking.
the two tools, our tool is also in the pre-testing stage. As I presented, we are just sharing the results of the pre-testing, and we are still going to improve on it. And eventually, our hope is that we can issue something by second semester of the year or early 2022. We're also thinking that if this tool will be adopted, it can be used also as one of the assessment tool for the GAD Timpala, which we use the GMF in terms of the gender mainstreaming. And then one area could be the functionality of the focal point of the organization to look at, because GFPS is just one element of mainstreaming. It's not really the be all and end all. It's just one of the mechanisms. So it could be a tool that can be used side by side with other existing gender mainstreaming tools to give recognition to government agencies and LGUs for their gender mainstreaming efforts. So that's our vision for how we can use the tool later on.
Can I not?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Ma'am Oyi.
I want to give some idea on, and Narling, why I'm asking those questions, I'm asking it as a CEDAW expert. You know that.
I know. We appreciate it. We appreciate it.
And when they hear that you have an assessment tool, wow, they will be so eager and so excited to hear it. But, but they will question you, okay, what does that mean? But how does it impact on women's lives? And I think you might find yourself in a quandary if you're not ready to answer that question, because they're very inquisitive about this and that tool and this and that law that has not been implemented. So I think most of the evaluators in the experts are after outcomes these days.
Yeah,
Okay.
we already have the JWEP plan right now, which is looking at the outcome of how women and women's empowerment and gender equality should be looked into until 2025, and we base that on the PPGD. So that's really the document that can look at the outcome of in terms of women's issues in the situation per sector. So we're saying that the GAD focal point should be able to know how to utilize the GWE in their agency. In terms of their GAD agenda setting, they should be able to look at the outcome level, not just output in terms of the number of trainings that they conduct, but really how will this contribute to realizing their mandates under the law, the targets under the GWE plan. So the wedge, GWE plan. I am thinking about the wedge plan, which is your term. So that's how we look at it. No, it's really now we're really advocating for more outcome level results for government agencies.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am
Thank
Nardine, and
you.
also yes, and also Ma'am Oyi. I think we have only time for one question each for each of the presenters. Is that okay? Ma'am Jean is my director, so I have to ask her, is it okay that we do just one more question each for all of you? It's 4:31.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
There were questions in the Q&A which were directed to us, and some of the questions actually were reflected reflected the concerns during registration. So if you wish, it's because it's 4:31, we can go to your synthesis and closing remarks.
Oh, okay. Okay, but I already chose. That's fine as well, Ma'am Jean. But I chose one question each that maybe you'd like to answer very quickly.
Okay.
Just one per presenter. Okay, I'll start with you. Ma'am, the question is more conceptual. How do you capture identities that are not sex-based, so apart from sex and gender, and how would you apply an intersectional lens in the assessment and analysis? Because you know that we don't take these social groups separately from each other. There are those with multiple subordinated identities. So how would you perhaps capture the data necessary?
The thing is that, again, by taking into account ethnicity, not all the categories actually are sex-based. There's only a subgroup that is sex or gender-based. There are other attributes of social exclusion, which are, let's say, whether it be rural or urban, ethnicity, indigenous peoples, Moro, or whatever. So, but the challenge is getting evidence for disaggregation, especially quantitative evidence. So as my answer in the Q&A bag said, go for, if you can't have the numbers, go for the qualitative. Then you can generate information. And this applies to information on the sexual and gender minority groups, because there's very little quantitative data on that. So because RIA is evidence-based, we have to start building evidence for categories of exclusion which are not part of the official data collection and data reporting system. I hope.
Okay. Yes, I think that answers the question. So there are also limitations in terms of available data that we need to take into consideration. Dr. Bianchi, Lara, just one question for you. What other mechanisms or strategies can we use for gender to be more appreciated on the ground, especially among Moro in particular, but generally indigenous communities?
Well, I don't have an answer to that. What I know is that we keep talking about sustainable development, and sustainable development for all cannot be achieved without gender equality. And the impression is that many initiatives don't take in consideration the readiness of women to be equal among humans. So sometimes it's a work that we need to do, not saying educating, it's not just a matter of education, but it's a matter of raising awareness of among women that they are very much holders of rights, and the rights are equal between all kind of humans, as not that men are superior in any form or shape. And this is a message that it needs to be delivered to men for sure, but primarily, I guess, to women.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much. And for Ma'am Narlene, just one last question. Is there a tool that can be used by oversight agencies in assessing gender and social inclusion? I think they're looking at something related to the GESIIA.
Maybe Ma'am Jean will be a better.
Ma'am,
Ma'am Jean
can we do
will
the
have a
same with
better
government
information
agencies?
on that.
Yeah.
When you talk about oversight, that's the the one, the NEDA, DBM.
NEDA, yeah. DILG. Yeah. I don't think there is a tool yet, but Darling and I can start developing one when we get the time. Because that's a very valid question. Because another question that was raised by the people when they registered is, how do you effectively do gender mainstreaming when you don't have clients? When you're not working directly with people or with communities, you're the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health. So it's like being the situation as the oversight agency. So my work with regulatory agencies falls in that category.
Yeah.
Because they don't work with communities per se. But although their decisions affect communities. So I said that just because you're not directly working with community clients doesn't mean that what you do don't kill people.
Yes.
For instance, when there was a regulatory failure as a result of the Mark Copper disaster in the 1990s. Sorry, I have to introduce.
Okay.
Nats, may I just add what to
Yes, please,
Ms.
ma'am.
Jean's inputs?
Yes, ma'am.
I think even if there is no available tool yet, that should not hamper or that should not be a reason for not including them in your analysis. Because when we talk about gender-based analysis, we can use data, we can use quantitative data and qualitative data that has been mentioned all over in terms of tools development. No? So if there is no number yet, agencies can do consultation, can do focus group discussion to get the issues of people of diverse SOGI. So that should not be a reason that you will not do gender mainstreaming or will not address the concerns of people of diverse SOGI because there is no tool. Because part of the process of integrating the gender perspective is to do gender-based analysis. So that's what we are advocating and what we are saying. Actually, it's a step for GAD planning and budgeting to do gender analysis and apply tools. So if that's not, the tool is not yet available, then we use the usual gender analysis that we do, where we do consultation, where we analyze data. So those are things that can be done.
And we hope that they're capacitated enough to do gender analysis because
that's why they need to tap expertise from
Yes.
UP, from Miriam, from Saintsco, from PCW to help in their capacity development.
Yes.
No?
Okay.
And GRP.
And your pool.
Yeah. So thank you very much to our presenters and also our discussants. And it's 6:38 and I have to deliver the synthesis and closing remarks. Dami kong homework. So now I'd like to again greet everyone. Very good afternoon. And as part of the WSAP and the UPCWGS, which are partners in bringing to you this webinar, I've been asked to deliver the synthesis as well as the closing remarks. Women continue to experience discrimination, exploitation, marginalization, oppression, and subordination in the various societal spheres. Gender relations, and we know this, are obstinately hierarchical, with more rights, privileges, and power allocated to men than to women. We also recognize that women are not homogeneous. They are differentiated by other social identities such as class, ethnicity, religion, ability, or disability, age, sexual orientation, etc. It is those with multiple subordinated identities who are rendered most vulnerable because of intersecting structures of inequality. These are fundamental premises of gender impact assessment tools. This afternoon, we were familiarized with 3 tools that can be used by gender and development advocates in different contexts. These are the GAD Focal Point System Functionality Assessment Tool for national government agencies, the Gender and Social Inclusion Impact Assessment Tool for policies, laws, and regulations, and the Moral Capability Assessment Tool for women's rights in fragile contexts. These tools focus on different areas and have distinct uses. The GFPS FAT is a self-assessment tool that will ensure that LGUs and NGAs have a working mechanism for GAD mainstreaming. This is the GAD Focal Point System, or the GFPS, which is an institutional mechanism that catalyzes and accelerates gender mainstreaming in national agencies. The GFPS FAT determines whether or not the agency has a GFPS and where it is on a functionality scale, from established to functional, highly functional, and lastly to fully functional. The data gathered will allow the identification of areas of improvement and the technical assistance needed from the PCW. The GESIIA tool is used to evaluate existing policies as well as a range of policy options in terms of patterns of inclusion and exclusion, their qualitative impacts on women and other marginalized sectors, and gains and losses to the Philippine economy. It establishes a clear rationale for a policy, includes a cost-benefit analysis of possible options, identifies the policy which has the greatest net benefit, while ensuring meaningful consultation with key stakeholders. The Mcat, the third tool presented, is a digital training package that facilitates more meaningful participatory processes in working with women and highlights the value of gendered participatory processes, women's moral capability and moral agency, and co-production of knowledge. It utilizes an art-based and creative methodology, is focused on conflict-affected areas, and works at the intersection of gender, armed conflict, and women's human rights. The GFPS FAT assesses a mandated mechanism for all government instrumentalities, namely the GFPS, with a view of enhancing its implementation. The GESIIA is used to evaluate existing and proposed policy options. The Mcat, on the other hand, is more novel in that the approach is bottom-up. It strives to understand women's awareness of their rights because of the recognition that this impacts their agency, and this awareness is utilized in designing development interventions. The GESIIA and the Mcat overtly recognize that gender intersects with other marginalized identities. The GESIIA pays equal attention to other marginalized sectors with a view of ensuring that there is no social exclusion. The Mcat additionally raises critical consciousness among target groups, developing new knowledge and solidarities with them, and giving them voice and agency. Our reactors provided very insightful suggestions on how the tools can be enhanced or what must be remembered in their utilization. For the GFPS FAT, collect qualitative data for better contextualization, tailor-fit the criteria and scoring guide to the institution, focus also on outcomes and results on women's lives, and consider how civil society can be involved. For the GESIIA, do not assume, which means asking the right questions at the early stages of the development of the policy. Bear in mind the right to self-determination of marginalized groups, and ensure a rights-based and people-centered approach. And lastly, for the Mcat, ensure not only meaningful engagement, but also the absence of hierarchies. Implement the Mcat during the transition period of relative peace, and Dr. Bianchi already said that it is to be used during this period. Listen to women's voices and be cognizant of their limitations in terms of participating in programs and in terms of assuming leadership roles. The tools presented this afternoon are vital to assess the impacts of interventions and ensure that further responses are truly gender responsive and gender transformative. Their diversity highlights the heterogeneity of women, the multiplicity of their contexts, the multidimensionality of women's empowerment, and the resulting need for various interventions that will promote women's rights and empowerment, gender justice, and gender equality. The GESIIA also reminds us that as feminists, we must look beyond gender and care equally about those who are subordinated on the basis of other social identities. On behalf of UPPAF Respond, the PCW, WSAP, and the UPCWGS, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon and for staying until the very end. Let us all continue to strive for gender and social justice and hold firmly to our loftiest aspirations of a more humane world where no one is left behind. We wish everyone a happy weekend and please keep safe. Maraming salamat po. Magandang hapon po muli sa lahat. But before we formally end the program, I now turn over the screen to Ma'am Jean Ilio for some very important announcements and acknowledgements.
Okay. Thank you very much, Natsi. Before we close, I think we will be giving out e-certificates for our speakers, and that includes me and our panelists. So will you show me one, please? Certificate of Appreciation is hereby presented to Narlene Santos Millar for imparting valuable insights as speaker in the WGDP webinar series on women's economic empowerment, number 7, Sustaining Gender Responsive Governance, New and Emerging Tools for GAD Advocates, held on May 21, 2021. This certificate of appreciation is given to Narlene and to Lara Bianchi, and it will be signed by Dr. Enrico L. Basilio. Now, for our panelists, we also have a certificate of appreciation for Professor Aurora Havati de Dios, for Hamilcar Chanwenko, for Maria Daryl Eliesa, and for Hamilcar Chanwenko Jr. So I would like to thank everyone, and wow, and a special certificate of appreciation for Dr. Natalie Africa Verceles for not only serving as moderator, but also providing us with synthesis and the closing remarks to our webinar. Thank you very much, Natsi.
Thank you very much.
And before we close, I would like to thank our partners, PCW, WSAP, UPCWGS, and USAID, and all of you who joined us via Zoom or Facebook. Our excellent moderator, Natsi, and our speakers and panelists, Lara and Narlene, Oyi, Daryl, and Ham. I also wish to acknowledge the technical support of the UPPAF Respond team, especially Miriel Damsani, Jasmine Montenegro, Jobel Alsati, and Kirima Bagas. Announcements from the support group. We have I think the next announcement has to do with our next webinar, right? Our next webinar will be on August 27, and it will be on improving connectivity to make regulatory reforms work for women-owned micro and small enterprises. Then we will have another in November that has to do with cyber security measures to protect women and children against online abuse. So those are our forthcoming webinars for the year. And I suppose Muriel had already posted the link to the survey, to the post-event survey. So, okay, so please accomplish the survey form and indicate there whether you want to receive a certificate of attendance that is for people who have been with us for at least 1 hour, and also if you want to get copies of the presentation. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.
Yay! Woo, nakaraos. My God. Ma'am, 4:49. Okay lang, di ba? Not so bad.
Yeah. at least it's at 5 o'clock. When I'm moderating, it goes to 5 o'clock. So
Okay,
you did a very good job.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Kahit na I had to, interrupt people speaking. I felt bad about that. Thank you, Ham. Thank you to all our speakers, our presenters, our discussants. Ma'am Jean, thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, UPPAF Respond, Ma'am Narlene. Maraming
Thank you,
salamat.
Doc Nancy. Thank you, Ma'am Jean. Mamo.
Yeah.
Yeah.